Hey, I'm Bryan, and welcome back to Vinyl Paints. So this is going to be a bit of a combination video. We're going to be looking at character shading in animation, as well as looking at a few pieces from my collection to have a surface level conversation on character shading in cell animation. Character shading is a huge subject matter, and it's only one area of what you see on the frame. So I'm probably only going to be scratching the surface of this, and there's a lot that won't be said. Maybe I'll get to cover it in a future video, but just understand that this is just a very surface level conversation. As I thought about this video, I realized that it might be a difficult conversation to have because the traditional 2D look that was created for cell animation has kind of become the backbone and foundation of modern 2D animation. So they do a lot of similar things. And I realized that a lot of people probably were exposed to both growing up, and they probably don't really have that definitive, oh, this was before and this was after. I was surprised to find out a lot of the animated shows that I thought were cell animated were actually not. The 2D animated look is just the foundation of the modern look. So you have things like Vox Machina, Invincible, where it's modeled on traditional animation. So on the surface level, it can be difficult to pick out the differences, even though they're there. Also, when the switch happened from traditional animation to digital, cells were not the only thing that were phased out. Line art slowly faded, hand-drawn animation was also replaced with digital drawn animation. It's not one thing that's missing, but rather a bunch of things that contributed to this. So one of the biggest factors when it comes to character shading is time. But realistically, from a producer's point of view, it's money. Every time you add shadow, you're adding extra time, extra complexity, extra money. So often characters are painted flat or one tone. This isn't a technical term, this is just how I describe it, but I think it's the easiest way to explain it. One color for one object. All skin color is one color, each article of clothing is one color, each item is one color. This is the best way to visualize this is think of The Simpsons, the Looney Tunes. Even modern shows like Family Guy and Futurama still use this principle. Probably the second most common form of shading, or realistically the first because flat doesn't really have shading, is what I call two-tone. You have a light and a dark of the same color, and you use them to contrast, the darker one representing the shadow and the light being the part that is exposed. You can see these examples in Gargoyles, Batman the Animated Series. It's pretty much the standard in traditional animation and pretty much the foundation of most of the lighting or shading principles in our characters that we see in modern 2D animation as well. And here's the interesting thing. You can often find both in the same series, in the same episode, and sometimes even in the same scene. When it was cell painted, this was probably done to save money, but it's a charming characteristic that has continued. And even now, when adding a second tone isn't as costly, they still go between flat and two-tone. Maybe as an homage, or maybe it's just become so entrenched in the style that it would be odd not to do it. Here are some examples of modern two-tone animations. A question I often get is, could you use more? And absolutely. Here is a cell conversion I did of Lucy from Cyberpunk. She probably has 6 different tones in her skin, but this would not be common in cell animated, mainly because it would skyrocket the budget and the time that it would cost to animate a scene. And that's kind of a perfect segue into something that cell painting doesn't commonly do. I say commonly because I haven't seen everything, so who knows, maybe someone did it, but what it is gradients and diffusions. Cell painting is all about solids. It's one color or another. It really doesn't do gradients or blends. So that's usually a good indicator of when you're getting something that's modern 2D animated as opposed to traditional 2D animated. You will see more blending and more gradients in modern animations that are computer colored. However, with that said, cell animation is a very creative medium. And yes, there are certain restrictions, but finding creative solutions around these barriers is kind of the fun part of working non-digitally. And to show this, at the end of this video, I'm going to do a little experiment and try to do a type of shadow shading that I don't think has ever been done in cell form. Now, this is a cell from The Simpsons, and as you can see here, it's a fairly simple lighting setup, but a realistic one. You have your darks and contrast. You have a two-tone where it's a shadow and a light tone, and they're pretty realistic, as in the light source looks to be in one spot and it's kind of affecting them accordingly. Some other cool, interesting notes or tidbits is that you can kind of see that they penned in the outline of certain colors, like around the lips and on the shadows. I'm not sure if it was art direction or was it an effort to save time, but they reused a lot of colors, so you'll see that her headband appears on his shirt and on his little necktie, as well as the yellow on her hair is very similar, is the same tone as the skin tone is. Also important to note that most of the Simpson characters usually have black eyes, but hers are actually painted in brown. And this is another cell from The Simpsons. It's clearly from an early season. Mo still has this black hair. And the reason why I wanted to show you this is because it doesn't have any contrasting colors. It's just a one tone. Their skin is one, the hair is black, the pink apron, all one color. Sometimes in animation, they want an effect and they're willing to spend a little bit more. Sometimes it's just simpler to do something like this where it's just one tone because it's cheaper, quicker, and faster. I want to take a look at the X-Men animated series. This is a scene between Cyclops and Marvel Girl, and they did something a little bit different here with the lighting and shadow. It's a two-tone setup where they have the shadow and the light, but then you get this like highlight that's actually done by applying a light coat of white, and you can see that on his cheek and as well as on the outside of her mask. Interesting to note here is that there's no outline for the lips, and it looks like they painted the lips on top of the cell as opposed to actually having it planned in beforehand. I'm just doing like a quick little field test here just to see what's on top of the cell and what's actually in the back. And it looks like that white is actually on the top of the cell. Now we're going to the 90s Ninja Turtle series, and this one as well, they're trying to do a bit of a natural lighting setup. The one thing I've noticed is that the characters are kind of like independently lit, like Rocksteady. Where's this Bebop? Nah, I'm pretty sure it's Rocksteady. He doesn't actually affect Shredder at all. The gun that's on top of Shredder doesn't cast a shadow on him, and it's a simple two-tone setup. It looks like they did a lot of the pen work on the top of the cell, as well as you can see that there is the outlines, the gray there, for the where the two grays will meet is actually done on top of the cell. And you can see some better examples here on the hand where it kind of overlaps the actual wristwatch. They do use the white highlights as well, but the shadows are very realistic. They carried through pretty much doing two tones on everything. The pants has two tones, the shirt has two tones. Shredder actually has very little shadow on him. It actually almost makes me wonder if this is actually from the same scene or are these just two cells that were combined for one for selling purposes. I wanted to show something outside of the North American animation, and this is from GTO, Great Teacher Ozai, and it really shows a completely cinematic approach to lighting and shadows in animation. And they're usually doing like a two-tone setup, like you'll see that with the shirt, where it's like a dark gray and a light. The shirt, the vest is yellow and then dark yellow, but they'll add little details of like, here's a reflection there. And then when you get to the hair, you just realize 1, 2, 3, there's at least 3 different shades of brown, 3 different colors of line art. It's really complex, and the lighting source is motivated. And I want to show you the duga of this, because you can see here that they have, this is just kind of showing you all the work that's going into it. You can see here that every one of these different colors in this is a different color for either the paint or the line art. So you've got your two tones here on the shirt, and even little details like putting in the white on the bag outlined, and then some extra red in here. The skin tones obviously are 2. The lines that you see that are in blue, that's a whole different in color. And then when we get here to the head and to the face, you'll see that obviously you have the anime blush lines, but in the hair you have this red, which is going to be a line art, a distinct color that's going to be a lighter brown. You have the hair color is going to be here. All these are all different colors, and it doesn't really show up well, but the skin's one, and you really just get a sense of how complex this is. So just in examining the face here, you can see just how complex it can be with the lighting. And as I said before, this is a very cinematic approach to lighting. And this is just one of the many ways that I've noticed anime kind of goes a little hardcore sometimes with their lighting. This is a cell from the HBO animated series Spawn. This is of Jade, and I really like what Spawn did with their approach to lighting. Spawn's a bit of a dark character, kind of, it's got that dark element, grunge look. And so what they did, which I think is completely amazing, they ignored the two-tone setup and instead they did one tone and black. So anytime there's a secondary tone on that character, it'll usually end up with that object being black. If you look at her hair, it's just black and blue. Her shirt is white and black. It really allows these characters to play very well in the shadows. I noticed that in certain parts they'll put a little bit of white on top of the cell or extra color on top of the cell to kind of give it a bit of a sheen or reflection. You'll notice that on the swords and on her armbands, but it's a very different approach than any of the other cells we have seen today. And just to further emphasize this is an actual cell of Spawn from the animated series. And like I said, it's amazing because it's either one tone or black. They don't really do in between tones or two tones or anything else. It's just black and color. And I think that really helps the animated series feel different. All the line work you're seeing here on Spawn is actually painted in after the fact on top of the cell, and that's really kind of cool because usually at this point most of the cells were being done through Xerox or through photocopies pretty much. So a lot of that line art is usually just printed line art. They're using the lighting very artistically here. This isn't cinematic lighting. This isn't really very natural. It's just used here to create these shapes and colors. It's almost as if the art director or the team decided we want to see parts of him, but not all of it. We want to keep him in shadows a lot. And here's the back side of it just to show you just like how much black is on there. So keeping in theme with Spawn, here is the Violator, or in his clown form from the HBO animated series Spawn. And once again, we're getting the same thing. We're just getting blacks with color. And they did the line art on top once again to kind of give it very serrated, jagged edges with the blacks. And I actually think that works really well for it. It's really cool. So you have your black, but then you have these hard edges. And they didn't do it, they did that intentionally because here on the head, it's just black. It's just one tone. It's just skin tone and black. Blue, face paint, black. They will obviously have two blues here because the design calls for two blues, but they're never split. There's never any shadowing, at least on most of the stuff I have. It's usually just one tone and black. And the shadows on Spawn really help get the atmosphere across. I really like it. It's really unlike any of the other animation cells I've seen. HBO Spawn is kind of special in its way. This series had a really unique way of lighting things. And I think that helps create a very menacing, dark feel to this. And obviously, because there's so much black, I would say on these Spawn cells, 60% of it is black, and it makes it look really good. And here we have old Bruce Wayne from Batman Beyond. It's a 2-cell setup with the eyes and the keyframe behind. I wanted to show this one very quickly. It's just a flat lighting. It's one tone, that's it. And that's probably just because, like I said, animation can be expensive, and sometimes if it seems not that important, you just keep it simple. And here we have a cell from Batman the Animated Series of Batman and Talia, and it's pretty interesting to see that they're using their lighting more to create shape. And here on Talia they have the black on purple, which is funny because in my last video I said I didn't really like black on purple, and of course in the next video here it is on a classic series. And then here on Batman you can see that they're using it. It's not really natural because obviously this part here would be shadow would be in because of the cowl. It does look like maybe there's another cell that goes on top of this because that looks very jaggedy on his rib cage there. But even here, once we go down a little bit further and we pan down, we can kind of see that they're using it kind of as They're using the lighting here more to add emphasis and to create separation and to create shape. And the blue on the pants is used as a sheen just to kind of give it a little bit of, like I said, separation. Because if you look at the gun here, now that's actually lit relatively realistic to how the scene would be. Like it's all in dark here and then light with shadows underneath. But Batman doesn't match that lighting at all. In fact, shadow on shadow here, his leg and the gun. Like I said, it's more of an artistic thing, and that's one of the great things about animations. You can get away with doing artistic stuff like that. And here we have Lois Lane and Jimmy. This is not much to say about this one because this is actually a very natural lighting setup. The light source seems to be coming from one spot. You have the two tones on the characters. Jimmy and Lois actually feel like they're actually in the same scene. They're lit the same. So you'll see the shadows on one side, under the necks, on the side, on the right-hand side of them. It's interesting because a lot of the animation cells we've seen today haven't actually lit both characters in the scene as if they were meant to be in the same scene. Cell animation is a very creative medium. Yes, you have certain restrictions in cell painting, but finding creative solutions around barriers is kind of the fun part of working non-digitally. I'm always trying to find new information on cell painting. Because of that, the YouTube algorithm tends to feed me a lot of videos on disappearing art forms. I grew up in this odd bubble where anime and manga were not really talked about, so I missed out on a lot of it. But I was pushed this video talking about screentones and how they were used to create shadow, background, and lighting in manga. So I found an old Kenobi painting I did and began to work. One of the things I didn't really think about when I did this was that the Kenobi in this painting is very small, and I probably should have picked a piece with the characters were a little bit larger. This is an early test, so I have plenty of room to refine the process, but yeah, it works. I kind of like how it turned out, and I think I'm going to actually create a piece designed to do this, as opposed to this Kenobi one, which was kind of just like repurposed to see if it would work. And this might be the first example of a screen tone cell painting crossover. And I'm looking forward to doing this in a more complex piece in the future. Thanks for joining me. I'm Bryan, and this is Vinyl Paints.